The night I accidentally read Lydia's unsent note, she walked in from the hallway wearing my old Northwestern sweatshirt and a pair of mismatched socks. One gray, one with tiny pineapples on it, and when she saw me standing at the kitchen island holding her phone, her face moved through three expressions so fast I almost missed them. Surprise. Recognition. Something that looked a lot like the moment you realize you left the stove on halfway to work. She looked at the screen, then at me, then the screen again. That was the night 7 months of carefully maintained, roommate distance collapsed in about 30 seconds. My name is Warren Holt. I was 28, a UX designer at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, the kind that built apps for things people didn't know they needed until they couldn't live without them. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill with Lydia Fenn, 26, a pastry chef who worked the 5 a.m. shift at a French bakery 2 miles away and somehow came home every afternoon smelling like butter and cardamom instead of defeat. She moved in after my college roommate took a job in Denver and gave me 3 weeks' notice. I posted in a housing group, interviewed 5 people, and said yes to Lydia because she was the only one who didn't ask me twice about the parking situation. She asked about the thermostat. I said I ran warm. She said she ran cold. That was our first real conversation. We signed the lease 2 days later. The arrangement was supposed to be functional. Split the rent, keep separate shelves in the fridge, don't make it weird. That last rule was unspoken, which probably should have told me something. Lydia didn't make it easy to keep things uncomplicated. She left pastry experiments on the counter with sticky notes that said things like, "Not for you, Holt," "Client order," and then left exactly one extra piece anyway. She critiqued the apps I was designing over her morning coffee with the unself-conscious honesty of someone who had zero reason to be careful with my feelings. She fell asleep during documentaries and somehow always knew the ending when I asked her about it later. She noticed things. Quiet things. The kind most people don't bother with. If I came home and didn't say much, she didn't prod. She just put on a record and let the apartment breathe. I told myself what I felt was proximity. The natural warmth that develops when 2 people share a refrigerator and a utility bill for long enough. It wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I started listening for the sound of her key in the lock on the nights she worked late. That I had memorized her coffee order, oat milk, 1 sugar, no vanilla, without meaning to. That when she laughed at something across the room, I had to consciously stop myself from looking over to see what it was. I had reasons for keeping all of that inside, good ones. 2 years earlier, I dated a woman named Rachel who lived 1 floor below me in my old building in Belltown. We'd been friendly for almost a year before anything happened, and when it did, I thought the foundation was solid. Turns out you can mistake shared history for compatibility. When we broke up, badly, quietly, in the way that lingers worse than a fight, I ran into her every time I did laundry, every time I got my mail, every time I left for work in the morning. I gave up the apartment 6 months later. A lease I liked, in a neighborhood I loved, gone because I'd gotten the math wrong on a feeling. I was not going to do that to Lydia. She had made that apartment her home in a way I hadn't expected. She'd hung photos she'd taken herself in the hallway. She'd rearranged the kitchen so it actually worked. She watered the half-dead pothos I'd been ignoring for a year and named it Gerald. I was not going to be the reason she had to pack up Gerald and start over somewhere new. So I kept the rule I'd never said out loud. The Friday everything changed. Anton and Kira came over for dinner. Anton had been my closest friend since sophomore year at Northwestern. Kira was a friend of Lydia's from her culinary school days. They had been dating for 4 months and had reached the particular phase where happy couples start sharing food off each other's plates in public without asking and act like this is not a personality change. Lydia had brought croissants and little lemon tarts home from the bakery. I made pasta, which I was confident about, and a salad, which I was less confident about but pretended otherwise. We set the table with the mismatched plates Lydia had picked up from the antique market on Melrose, lit a couple of candles she insisted were not fire hazards, and somehow made our apartment look like people actually had their lives together. It was a small table. Our knees bumped. She reached past me at one point to grab the peppermill, and her hair brushed my cheek. She didn't move away immediately. Neither did I. I heard Anton very deliberately begin a new sentence. Over dinner, Kira asked how we'd met. Not how we'd ended up as roommates, but how we'd met, as if she suspected there was a better story hiding underneath. Lydia told it first, slightly more accurately than I would have. I had posted a very detailed listing with a list of preferences that Lydia described as essentially a behavioral questionnaire. I had asked her during the interview whether she considered herself a morning or evening person, and she'd said, "Neither, I'm a 5 a.m. person," which is a different category entirely. And for some reason that had made me feel like she was going to be fine. Kira set her chin in her hand. "And now look at you," she said, with the tone of someone narrating a nature documentary. Lydia glanced at me over her wine glass. I looked at the pasta. After dinner, Anton and Kira moved to the living room while Lydia and I cleaned up. This was the routine we developed without ever discussing it. Whoever cooked, the other one cleared. Whoever cleared, the other one washed. It worked. We moved around the kitchen without running into each other, because somewhere in 7 months we'd learned each other's patterns without meaning to. "Your friend is not subtle," Lydia said quietly, rinsing a plate. "Kira." "Anton." I dried the plate she handed me. "He's been like that since college. He thinks he's reading a room. He's actually just narrating it out loud." She smiled at the sink. "Kira's worse. She texted me 3 times this week asking what was going on with us." I looked over. "What did you tell her?" She handed me another plate. "Nothing to report." I didn't say anything. The faucet ran between us. From the living room, Anton said something and Kira laughed. Outside the window, a siren passed and faded. "Is that what you actually think?" I asked. Lydia's hands slowed in the water. She glanced at me sideways. "Warren." "That's a dodge." "I know," she said. And then Kira called from the living room, asking if there was more wine, and the moment folded itself up and slid under the counter. Anton and Kira left around 10. Lydia walked them down, came back up, kicked off her shoes by the door, and curled up on the couch with her phone. I finished putting away the last of the clean dishes. When I came to the living room, she was already asleep. Phone in one hand, the other tucked under her cheek, audio from some cooking video, playing quietly from the speaker. I watched her for a second, longer than I should have. I turned down the volume on her phone. I set it on the coffee table. Except the screen was on when I picked it up. Notes app, a long entry she'd apparently been writing. For a while, my eyes caught the first line before I registered what I was doing. "I think I've been in love with my roommate for 3 months, and the worst part is, I can't tell if it's real. Or just what happens when you live close to someone who brings you soup when you're sick and remembers you hate cilantro." I should have put it down. I know that. I know exactly how that looked, holding her phone in the living room while she slept on the couch. But I read the next line before I could stop myself. "But then he laughed at something on Tuesday, and I wanted it to be me. I wanted it to be me every time. I don't know what to do with that." I set the phone on the table and stood very still. Behind me, Lydia shifted. The couch cushions rustled. Then Warren? I turned around. She was sitting up, hair pushed to one side, blinking at me with the specific confusion of someone not quite out of sleep. Then she looked at the coffee table. The phone, face up, screen still bright. She looked at me. I watched the sequence again. Surprise, recognition, the stove-on moment, and then something else. Something quieter and braver and tired. "How much did you read?" she asked. Her voice was steady, not panicked, not sharp, just careful. "Enough," I said. She nodded slowly, like she'd asked herself the same question and gotten the same answer. She reached over and picked up the phone, turned the screen off, set it back down. "That was supposed to go to Kira," she said. "I kept starting it and not sending it because I couldn't figure out what I needed her to say back." I sat down on the other end of the couch. "What did you need her to say back?" She looked at me then, directly, no performance in it. That I wasn't making something up. That it was real, and I wasn't just... She searched for the word, projecting onto proximity. Something loosened in my chest. "You're not." She went still. "You can't just say that without..." "I know," I said. "I know that's not enough on its own." I told her about Rachel. About the apartment in Belltown, the laundry room, The 6 months of running into her before I finally cut my losses and moved. I told her I had spent the better part of 3 months deciding that feeling things for my roommate was a risk I had no right to take, that the apartment was more hers than mine. At this point, that she'd turned it into something real, and if I read the situation wrong and wrecked it, she'd be the one left holding the lease on a place that felt like someone else's mistake. Lydia listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she was quiet for a moment. "You moved because of a breakup?" she said. "I gave up the apartment, yeah." She looked at me. "Warren, that's not going to happen." "You don't know that." "No," she said. "But I know that I've been typing that note and deleting it for 6 weeks. And you're sitting 2 feet from me right now not doing anything instead of making this about you. And that's already different from any situation I've been afraid of." I looked at her. The lamp behind her made the room warm. Gerald the pothos drooped slightly from the windowsill. The city outside made its usual sounds. "I notice you too," I said. "All the time, I've been pretending I didn't." She let out a slow breath, like she'd been holding it since she woke up. We talked for another 2 hours after that. Not about feelings in the large, abstract sense. About the specific ones. The Tuesday she mentioned. The way I waited for her key in the lock. The coffee order. She told me she'd started making extra of whatever she baked on Sundays because she wanted an excuse to leave it on the counter where I'd find it. I told her I'd reorganized the fridge once, specifically so her yogurt wouldn't be behind something, and I'd been annoyed at myself about it for a week. She laughed until she had to put her head on the back of the couch. By midnight, we were both too tired to say anything more that mattered. She fell asleep on the couch again, and I went to bed and stared at the ceiling in the dark for a while, feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not quite relief. More like the specific feeling of a door you'd been pushing on finally turning out to open the other way. In the morning, I made coffee. I stood at the counter and made 2 mugs, which I had honestly been doing for months, but this time I did it without the usual internal argument about what it meant. Lydia came out at 7:15 in the sweatshirt again. Different socks, both the same color this time, which felt like progress. She looked at me the way you look at something when you're checking whether it's still the same thing it was the night before. "Are you weird about it?" she asked. "I'm trying not to be." That's the Warren Holt version of "I'm fine." "I'm fine," I said. She almost smiled. "There he is." She took the mug I handed her. Her fingers were warm where they touched mine for a second. We stood in the kitchen in the morning light, drinking our coffee, and it was the same and completely different, and somehow both of those things felt okay. I asked her to dinner that Saturday. A real one, not takeout on the couch. She said, yes, obviously yes, without any performance around it, which made it land harder than it would have if she'd made a joke first. I showed up to the living room with flowers, ranunculus, white and pale pink, from the farmer's market on Melrose. I had bought them because 3 weeks earlier she'd stopped in front of a bucket of them outside a flower stand and said, almost to herself, "These are my favorite, and nobody ever uses them in arrangements." She hadn't been talking to me. She'd been talking to the flowers. When she saw them, her face went briefly soft in a way she didn't try to cover. "You remembered that," she said. "You said it out loud." I say a lot of things out loud. I know, I listen. She looked at the ranunculus for a second longer. Then she looked at me. Then she got her coat. The restaurant was a small Italian place in Eastlake, with candles jammed into old wine bottles and a menu with more specials than printed items. Our knees touched under the table in a way that this time we did nothing about. She ordered gnocchi. I ordered whatever the server suggested because I had a hard time focusing on the menu. Halfway through dinner, she asked me something I wasn't ready for. "What scared you most? Not about me specifically, about this." I set down my fork. I told her the real version, not just the Rachel story, but the feeling underneath it. That I was someone who planned things, who mapped things out, checked the load-bearing walls before hanging anything on them, and falling for someone who lived in the same space as me was structurally unsound in a way I couldn't logic my way around. She listened. She didn't rush in with reassurance. When I stopped talking, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not squeezing it, Just there. I'm not asking you to stop being careful, she said. I'm asking you to let careful and real exist at the same time. I turned my hand over under hers. I can do that. She smiled, small and real. Good, because you're the first person in a long time who's made me feel like it's okay to be exactly this much. I didn't know what to say to that. I just held on. Slow, it turned out, did not mean distant. Slow meant she started leaving 2 mugs out instead of 1 without acknowledging she'd done it. Slow meant I picked up her specific brand of almond milk at the store without her asking. Slow meant watching a movie on a Thursday night and her ending up half on my shoulder by the second episode and neither of us pretending it was an accident. She had bad weeks. The bakery could be brutal, and she had an early morning sous chef who had opinions about everything and kept his opinions inside her shift schedule. On those nights, I learned not to ask how work was and instead just made tea and let her be still for a while. She learned that when I got quiet, it didn't mean I was pulling away. It meant I was processing something I hadn't finished yet. And one evening, she knocked on my door and said, "You've been quiet for 2 days. I need to know if we're okay." And I said, "We're okay, I'm just in my head." She looked at me for a second. "Okay, come be in your head on the couch then." Anton asked me about 3 weeks and whether I was happy. I thought about it the way I thought about most things. Too long, with too much consideration. And then I said, "Yeah." He nodded once. "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you stopped bracing." I didn't answer. He was right and we both knew it. I told Lydia I loved her on a Wednesday afternoon in October, not at dinner, not in any moment I had considered or rehearsed. She was on the kitchen floor, surrounded by rough sketches for a custom wedding cake order, arguing out loud with herself about whether a wrinkle read as romantic or simply sad at scale. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear and a flower smudge on her left forearm that she didn't know about. She looked up at me and asked, with complete seriousness, what I thought. I looked at her, I said, "I love you." She blinked. "What?" "I've been trying to figure out the right moment for 3 weeks, and you just asked me about periwinkle, and I couldn't hold it anymore." She stared at me for a long time. Then she got up off the floor, crossed the kitchen, took my face in both hands, flower and all, and kissed me. "Pulled back. Sophisticated," she said. "What?" "Periwinkle. It's sophisticated, not sad." She kissed me again. "And I love you too. Holt, you absolute disaster." After that, the words became part of the apartment the way everything else had. Quietly, without announcement. Folded into mornings. Written on a post-it stuck to my coffee mug one Tuesday that said, "Coffee. Holt, love you. Don't make this weird." I kept it stuck to the inside of my cabinet door for 4 months. In the spring, Lydia got approved for a small business loan and signed a lease on a counter space inside a coffee shop in Fremont. She'd been working toward it for years, a pastry counter of her own menu, her name on something she built. I helped her design the ordering system and the website, the first project in years that felt like it mattered in a way I couldn't entirely explain. The night before her soft open, she sat on the kitchen counter at 11 p.m. and could not make herself sleep. "What if nobody comes?" she said. Not a question, a fear she was holding out loud. "People will come. What if the croissants aren't right?" "Lydia, Anton has texted me 4 times in the last month, asking whether he can stop by sometime, and he lives in Bellevue." She laughed, but it faded quickly. "What if I built something and what if it falls apart?" I came to stand in front of her. She was sitting on the counter, which put us at the same height, which was unusual and somehow easier. "You told me once," I said. "That slow doesn't mean uncertain." She looked at me. "I said that?" "Third date, the Italian place." She was quiet. Then she put her forehead against mine and closed her eyes. I put my arms around her. We stayed like that for a while in the kitchen light, Gerald drooping cheerfully in the window behind her, the city doing its late-night thing outside. "Okay," she said finally against my cheek. "Okay," I said. On the 3rd day of her opening week, I stopped in before work. The space was small and warm, with good light, and the smell of something with orange zest and brown butter that made everyone at nearby tables stop talking for a second when it came out of the oven. Next to the register, Lydia had hung a small black frame. Inside it, printed on plain white paper, were two lines. I wanted it to be me every time. I don't know what to do with that. Underneath, in smaller type, October, the night everything changed. I stood there for a while. A woman behind me in line leaned toward her partner and whispered something, probably about the pastries. You framed it, I said when Lydia came around the counter. It's where it started, she said. She looked at it, then at me. I wanted it somewhere I could see it when things get hard. To remember that the scary thing turned into the real thing. I thought about saying something deflecting. I didn't. I just looked at her. This person who had moved into my spare room with a bag of ceramic mixing bowls and a pothos she'd named Gerald before I thought to ask, who had turned my careful, braced life into something I actually wanted to come home to. And I said, I love you. She smiled. She handed me a croissant. I know. I wrote it on your mug this morning. Months later, she asked me once if I wished I'd said something sooner. I thought about it honestly. I thought about who we were then. Two people who both had reasons to be careful, who needed to arrive at this, at the speed we actually arrived at it. I thought about the note she wrote and kept not sending. I thought about the rules I kept but didn't say out loud. I thought about how love doesn't always find you like a light switch. Sometimes it moves in slowly, labels its shelf in your fridge, learns your coffee order, notices your silences, and waits in your kitchen at 11 p.m. for you to stop being afraid. I said no. We got there exactly when we were supposed to.